Chapter 3 The Road to the Moon. On the morning of the 31st of August, heavy black clouds covered the sky above the Z-Test Center. Nothing could be seen around the building but pouring water. Julius stood at the window of a waiting room, watching the rain draining away into the flower beds. At that moment, Morgana came running across the paved square. Before entering through the circular door, she turned and waved to her family, who were standing near their flycar, huddled under an umbrella. Because parents were not allowed into the center, Julius had to say goodbye in the Bumblebee. The McCoys had enjoyed a long and cheerful meal together the night before, during which Jenny and Rory had given Julius plenty of good advice. When his brother had told him about his test back in April, Michael had been very excited, but as the month had passed, he had grown quieter and quieter. The realization that it would be another 2 long years before he would have the chance to join Zed, and therefore be reunited with his brother again, had put him in a miserable mood. "You can come and visit me in midwinter," Julius had told him in the flycar. "I'll show you Satras and the Hologram Palace, and we can play games all day." The idea of playing with his brother in a Hologram Palace had had a soothing effect on Michael, who had squeezed his brother tightly. "You are the best, Julius, and not just because of the Hologram Palace." "I love you, Mickey," Julius had said, hugging him tighter. Thinking of Michael made Julius smile. He had promised him that he would write as often as he could, and he intended to keep to his word. Just then, Morgana walked into the room, leaving behind a trail of water. "I have now crossed the line between being wet and being water," she said, dumping her soaking rucksack on the floor. Julius helped her remove her coat. "Seen anybody else in the parking lot?" he asked. "Yes, there were 5 fly cars, all steamed up," answered Morgana. "I think there was a lot of talking and crying going on. It took me a good hour to leave home. My granny didn't want to let me go. She was so upset that in the end my mum decided to stay behind with her." "I will miss your granny," said Julius, "especially her amazing choc toffee coffee pie. Who knows what they're gonna feed us up there?" "Only the best cuisine," exclaimed Faith, entering the room and turning Morgana's trail of water into a puddle. "It was in the chip that Crest gave us. You haven't read it, have you?" "Aye, Faith, does that chair of yours float too?" asked Julius, watching water drip off it and onto the floor. "Yes, and it's also waterproof," he answered. "However, I am not. Can you help me to get this coat off, please? It weighs a ton." "That's because you're a girl," teased Julius, "and you, mister, are very predictable. I bet you brought music, history books, and your Tolkien collection, which, by the way, you must have read at least 30 times already," answered Morgana wryly. Each student was only allowed to bring 1 bag, weighing no more than 5 kilograms. The school would provide every essential, from toothbrush to underwear to classroom materials. They were also told not to bring any spare clothing. It was true that Julius packed quickly and that Morgana had been mostly right. He had packed everything that she had said and also an extra chip containing the addresses of his friends and family. His rucksack was pretty light, but he knew that whatever he might need could be found in Satras. "What's in your bag then? I bet you brought pictures of airports," said Julius, dismissing her last remark. "Actually, I put some music and books on my chips. I also brought a copy of my favorite world landscapes and the Encyclopedia of the History of Aviation," said Morgana. "Books and music for me too," added Faith, "plus my trusty repair kit for the chair. I never leave the house without it." Gradually, the other 4 students arrived. Billy Summers continued to avoid any interaction with the group, as if it would contaminate him somehow. Julius was grateful for Summers' quiet attitude. This was an exciting day for everybody, and nobody needed a spoiler. At 8 o'clock sharp, the door opened and a middle-aged woman in a grey suit entered the room. "Attention, please," she said in a firm voice. "Behind you are 2 doors leading to changing rooms, left for the ladies and right for the gentlemen. Inside, you will find a bag with your name on it. I want you to change into your uniform and place your civilian clothes in the bag. Leave them there. They will be sent back to your families." You have 15 minutes. Julius grabbed his rucksack and followed Alan Cross into the changing room. There were 4 grey packs lined up in the centre of the room. Julius found his own one and dragged it to the nearest bench. Excited, he pulled out a pair of combat trousers, a long-sleeved cotton t-shirt, a jumper, a pair of socks, boxer shorts, and a pair of sturdy boots. Each item was navy blue. There was a label on the left sleeve of both the jumper and the t-shirt. Julius grinned with pride as he read the silver letters, Julius McCoy, 1MJ, Tijara School. He was about to remove his own jumper when a sudden thought made him stop. Would Faith need help getting changed? And how was he supposed to ask without embarrassing him in front of the others? Unfortunately, Summer seemed to have had the same thought and was now turning towards Faith. "Shanigan, do you want me to call that nice lady to help you out?" he asked with a sneer. Julius froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. He knew that kids often mocked each other for a laugh, but in certain cases you just didn't. It was a line no one with even a hint of decency would ever cross. For that reason, the changing room had suddenly gone quiet, and all eyes were fixed on Billy and Faith. "Thank you, Summers," said Faith, smiling suddenly, "but I'm already waiting for your sister." Summers' face turned danger red, and he advanced towards Faith, fist clenched. Julius and Alan Cross immediately jumped between them. "Let me at him," cried Summers, trying to remove Cross from his path. "Yeah, let him come," shouted Faith, waving his fist in the air. "He insulted my sister." "That's 'cause you insulted him first," shouted back Julius, trying to keep Faith's chair from advancing. At that moment, an angry female voice bellowed out from a speaker in the room. "If I hear another sound coming from that room, none of you gentlemen will leave this Z Center. Ever!" Julius felt Faith's chair stop and released his hold. Summers threw Faith a nasty look and went back to his bench. "I don't need help," said Faith, his cheeks now slightly flushed. With that, he turned around and started to undress. Julius did likewise, but kept glancing towards Faith to check that he really could do it by himself. To his surprise, he did so very smoothly. His chair had special inbuilt arms that could lift Faith's body and legs while he changed his trousers. Once ready, Julius folded his old clothes and placed them inside the grey pack. There was a mirror in the room, and when Julius caught sight of his reflection, he instantly knew that his uniform was the symbol of a new life. Julius and Faith both had navy blue uniforms. Alan Cross's was dark red, and Billy Summers was olive green. They went back to the waiting room where the girls were already waiting. Morgana's uniform was also navy blue, but under the jumper she was wearing a pleated knee-length skirt and a pair of tall leather boots with flat heels. The grey uniformed woman threw a hard look at the boys. "Everyone, follow me now," she said sternly, and led them out of the room past the reception desk. Crossing over the paved square, they walked past the visitors' building where their parents had waited for them during their test and arrived at a runway. There, a small white shuttle was waiting for them. It was perched on 3 wheels with a set of steps leading to an opening in its side. The rain was still lashing down, so everybody ran to the steps, covering their heads with their rucksacks. Faith waited behind for the others to embark, and then hovered directly inside. Once aboard, they were told to sit near the front. Faith moved over to the designated area where he locked his chair in place. The woman checked that all their seatbelts were fastened while the shuttle prepared to take off. Julius looked out of the window to see if the bumblebee was still there, but the rain was too heavy to make anything out. The shuttle engines hummed into life, and several minutes later they were airborne. Mr. McCoy had explained to him that there were 3 different flying systems in the world. The lower one was used by fly cars. The second system, at a higher altitude, was for private aircraft and fly buses. The third one, an exclusive high-speed system, was only to be used by Z personnel. Any trespassers risked being sucked into the jet stream of the fastest aircrafts on Earth. And if they were still alive after that, and had no good reason for trespassing in the first place, being deported to the infamous halls of Ahriman. Mr. McCoy had not been too sure about where Ahriman was or where it had gained its reputation from, but the general opinion was that it was a doomed place, and for the young Julius it was enough to decide that he would never trespass in the Z high-speed system. They were flying over the German border when the pilot announced that they would be landing in the next few minutes. Morgana leaned over Julius to look down. It was a beautiful sunny day, and they could see Prague below, with the river dividing the city into two halves. "Look, that's Charles Bridge, and that one is Prague Castle," said Julius. They watched the west side of the city passing by, while the shuttle slowly descended towards the Z departure center. Upon landing, the aircraft kept moving along the runway and disappeared inside a tunnel. When it finally came to a halt, the woman led them all out. The departure center was a large hall with metal walls and a stained glass roof. Sun rays were streaming through its glass panels, creating beautiful rainbows on the floor below. Julius saw several doors leading out from the main area, some marked Z personnel only, and others civilian personnel only. There was also a cafe lit up in purple neon and a number of world restaurants. The main hall was crawling with boys and girls of all nationalities. Julius saw that in the middle of the hall, hovering in midair, there were 3 silver signs. Each of them represented one of the 3 Z schools. Below each sign, 3 squared sectors had been created with metal rails to gather the respective students. Julius' group followed the woman with the grey uniform through the noisy crowd. She stopped before a small gate, behind which was Tijara's sector. A tall officer wearing a Tijaran uniform took 3 microchips from the woman and ushered Julius, Morgana, and Faith inside. "See you in Satras," said Morgana, waving to the girls. "Bye, Julius. Bye, Faith," Alan Cross called after them. "Yes, Shanigan. See you later," added Somers sarcastically. The woman pushed Somers forward unceremoniously before Faith could reply. "What was that about?" asked Morgana, holding the gate open for Faith. She suddenly heard Julius' voice in her head. "Somers has been on his back ever since last spring, and Faith has his own wonderful way of dealing with provocation." He then gave her a quick summary of that morning skirmish in the changing room. Morgana shook her head and muttered something about boys and brains. When they entered the sector, a few smiling faces turned towards them. Julius, Faith, and Morgana smiled back and moved towards the side of the perimeter. "There must be about 60 of us in all the sectors, and more are coming out from the aircrafts," said Faith, hovering high above their heads, until the Tijaran officer told him to land immediately. 20 minutes later, they heard the officer talking into an earpiece, confirming that his students were all present. Julius looked around him and counted 30 people in his group. He was curious to know where they were all from, but knew better than to browse around in other people's minds. His parents had taught him very early in life about the importance of freedom and privacy. "How would you like it if Morgana knew all your secrets and told them to your friends?" Mr. McCoy had asked him. Julius had blushed furiously at the thought, and since then tried very hard not to take his skills lightly. However, there were occasional moments in which he could unintentionally perceive other people's thoughts, especially when he was relaxed, and that made him very uncomfortable. Slowly, the area between the sectors and the runway cleared. All the students were inside their perimeters, and Julius watched as the Tijaran officer joined them and locked the gate behind him. Suddenly, the platform on which they were standing began to descend through the floor. Julius grabbed hold of the rail to steady himself, and Morgana held on to Faith's chair. He felt the platform changing direction several times as it followed its underground track before coming to a halt in front of a wall, where a single door stood. The officer spoke again into his earpiece, and the door opened. He then turned towards the students. "My name is Captain Foster. I'm in charge of Tijara's security. Every year, I volunteer to collect the new students from Earth so that I have the chance to memorize each and every face. Make sure you do not have reason to meet me again, except for official receptions. Or war." He paused and fixed them all with an icy look. Julius thought that his voice alone had been enough to carry his point home, even without the killer stare, but obviously he wasn't going to bring that up. Once through this door, continued Foster, you will be inside the Z shuttle. I want you to occupy seats 1 to 30. Liftoff is at 10:00 hours. In 2 hours, you will be in Z. Shanigan, you go first. Move it! The group parted quickly to let Faith pass, and Julius and Morgana followed him. They entered from a side door near the front of the shuttle. There were 2 long rows of seats, 3 by 3, divided by a corridor. To his left, Julius saw the other students embarking, the Tuala group in the center and the Seals at the back. Faith moved to the top of the left row and locked his chair in place. Julius and Morgana took the seats behind him, leaving an empty one near the corridor. I'm glad there has been some progress in gravity research, said Giulio, fastening his seatbelts. Can you imagine traveling to the moon in one of those ancient rockets? Aye, it must have been murder, said Morgana, examining the shuttle. These models look just like normal aircraft, but the magic is in the engines. As always, said Faith. However, I would improve it with a touch or two, starting with the thruster setup, that is. At that moment, a boy walked up to them. He had a bush of brown curly hair and a dark tan. Aloha, mind if I sit here? He asked, smiling. Not at all, said Morgana, who was always the first to socialize with strangers. Konnichiwa! Wow, was that Japanese? Asked the boy. Yes, it was, but it's easier if we keep using the common speech. I'm Morgana, these two are Julius and Faith. I'm Lopaka Liwai, from Hawaii. Good to meet you. Hawaii! Cried Faith. Do you surf by any chance? Even when I sleep, replied Lopaka. Then you are my men. Come, sit. We have much to discuss, said Faith excitedly. Julius and Morgana looked at each other, puzzled. Even Lopaka appeared to be surprised, but since he clearly loved the sport so much, he was more than happy to pass the time discussing waves, waxes, and boards. When the shuttle lifted off, Julius barely noticed it, but he knew that he was rising above the clouds and making a straight line for the stars. The idea that he was leaving the Earth orbit was slowly sinking in, and he felt a new wave of excitement rushing through his body. He was happy to be there, happy to be alive, and even ashamedly happy that there had been a chemical war, since it was the only reason he was now on his way to the moon. As Morgana had gone to meet some of the girls behind them, Julius joined Faith and Lopaka in their surfing chat. They had been flying for over an hour when Morgana came back and dropped herself into her seat with a big smile on her face. I've met some of the girls in our class, she explained happily to Julius. Many of them come from the colonies, and they were telling me all about it. Maybe one day we'll be able to visit them. Wouldn't that be great? And maybe you'll be piloting the ship that takes us there. One day I will. Right now, though, I want to watch this Z video with you. When I went to visit Kaori before, it wasn't on our shuttle. Put on your headphones. Morgana pushed a button on the armrest of her chair, and a holoscreen appeared in front of them. She put on her own headphones and plugged Julius in next to hers. A few seconds later, the head of a young pretty woman with a blonde bob appeared on the screen. Good morning, and welcome to space. Please select the topic of interest from the choices below. 3 touchpads appeared over her smiling face: Moon, Marcos Tijara, and Z Lunar Perimeter. Morgana touched the first one, and the screen faded slowly to black. As different pictures of the moon started to scroll past, the lady's voice told them all sorts of information. Julius knew most of the things she was telling them, but he did manage to learn some new facts. As seen from the Earth, the moon appears to have bright and dark patches. The bright ones are craters and mountains which can catch the sun's light, and the dark ones are low-lying plains. Centuries ago, these plains were thought to be seas, or maria, and today we still call them by their first given names, such as Sea of Rains or Ocean of Storms, although in truth the moon is entirely without water. The moon does not have atmosphere, which means several things. The edges of the shadows are sharp as razors, since there is no mist to make them softer. There is no sound, since this needs air to travel. There is no protection from the sun during the day, and no way to imprison heat during the night, creating great extremes of temperature. Along the equator, the daily temperature is 100 degrees Celsius, whereas the night temperature can fall to minus 160 degrees. Whoa, cried Julius. That's almost as low as liquid air. Well, I'm not planning any trekking outside the lunar perimeter, added Morgana quickly. Let's hear about Marcus Tijara, said Julius, touching the screen. The woman's smiling face reappeared, and so did the three options. He pressed the next button, and the screen faded once more, to be replaced by the face of Marcus Tijara. Marcus Tijara was the first scientist to research the effect caused by the chemical war of the 25th century. Tijara himself was granted the gift, or curse as someone would call it, of highly developed mind skills. By 2620, Tijara, who had become highly esteemed in the eyes of the Earth leader, was granted permission to build the Z lunar perimeter on the moon. The perimeter was to become home to the Curia and to the Z Academy, a base for exploration of the galaxy and a defense system to maintain the hard-won peace on planet Earth. The blurb finished and the main menu reappeared. Is that all? Asked Julius, disappointed. I thought she was going to tell us about Marcus' battle with Cloda Arnesh and of how they both died. We'll probably study that in class, said Morgana. Julius pressed the last button. This is the Z lunar perimeter, said the woman. Only Z members and Curia personnel are allowed to live in the perimeter. Students of the schools are given special permission to reside in Z until completion of their 6 years of training, which will qualify them as Z members. They will study for 2 years as Miski juniors, 2 years as apprentices, and 2 years as seniors. The only habitable lunar area, Z, has been developed across 4 low plains. As you can see from the picture, the plain at the top is the Sea of Serenity, where you will find the Z docks. Below, it is the Sea of Tranquility, where you can relax in the bustling and friendly Satras. Who said that the moon doesn't have atmosphere? Added the voice with a giggle. I can't believe she said that, said Julius in a deadpan voice. She did, added Morgana, equally serious. Just to the right of the Sea of Tranquility, continued the woman, we have the Sea of Fertility, where the Z schools are situated. Tuala, Sealed, and of course, Tijara, where Marcus himself was Grand Master. In the schools, selected students can develop their mind skills in the form of white and grey arts. Finally, the plain at the bottom is the Sea of Nectar, home to the Curia, where the headquarters of colonial affairs are located. The woman's head flashed up for the last time. If you require any further information, visit us in Satras at the information kiosk. Thank you for your attention, and once again, welcome to Z, she said as the holo screen disappeared. It's all so exciting, said Morgana, putting the headset away. Learned anything new? Asked Faith now that they had finished. Yeah, the lady here recommends going for a walk outside Z around midday, said Julius. Faith looked a bit puzzled, but Morgana shook her head and rolled her eyes. Don't listen to him. She didn't say that. However, she did say some interesting stuff. Morgana then promptly filled Faith in on her latest discoveries. 10 minutes later, a voice came through the speakers which were fitted above each row. All students returned to their seats immediately and fastened their seatbelts for landing. Excited murmurs spread through the shuttle as everyone ran back to their seats. Unfortunately, he couldn't see much through the small windows, so Julius had to be content with sitting back comfortably, closing his eyes, and imagining his very first landing on the moon. End of chapter 3.